we will use the leverage, economic, diplomatic, and others, united with our allies and friends in Europe who are equally disturbed as we are about their recent behavior.
Senator Obama.
It will not be a reignition of the Cold War, but Russia is a challenge.
Senator Obama. We're winding down so we can keep track of the time.
Well, the resurgence of Russia is one of the central issues that we're going to have to deal with in the next presidency. And for the most part, I agree with Senator McCain on many of the steps that have to be taken, but we can't just provide moral support. We've got to provide moral support to the Poles and Estonia and Latvia and all the nations that were former Soviet satellites, but we've also got to provide them with financial and concrete assistance to help rebuild their economies. Georgia, in particular, is now brink of enormous economic challenges, and some say that that's what Putin intended in the first place. The other thing we have to do, though, is we've got to see around the corners. We've got to anticipate some of these problems ahead of time. You know, back in April, I put out a statement saying that the situation in Georgia was unsustainable because you had Russian peacekeepers in these territories that were under dispute. And you knew that if the Russians themselves were trying to obtain some of these territories or push back against Georgia, that was not a stable situation. So part of the job of the next commander-in-chief in keeping all of you safe is making sure that we can see some of the 21st century challenges and anticipate them before they happen. We haven't been doing enough of that. We tend to be reactive. That's what we've been doing over the last 8 years, and that has actually made us more safe. That's part of what happened in Afghanistan, where we rushed into Iraq, and Senator McCain and President Bush suggested that it wasn't that important to catch bin Laden right now and that we could muddle through, and that has cost us dearly. We've got to be much more strategic if we're going to be able to deal with all the challenges that we face out there. And one last point I want to make about Russia. Energy is going to be key in dealing with Russia. If we can reduce our energy consumption, that reduces the amount of petrodollars that they have to make mischief around the world. That will strengthen us and weaken them when it comes to issues like Georgia.
This requires only a yes or a no. Ronald Reagan famously said that the Soviet Union was the evil empire. Do you think that Russia, under Vladimir Putin, is an evil empire?
I think they've engaged in evil behavior, and I think that it is important that we understand they're not the old Soviet Union, but they still have nationalist the impulses that I think are very dangerous.
Senator McCain?
Maybe.
Maybe.
Depends on how we respond to Russia, and depends on a lot of things. If I say yes, then that means that we're reigniting the old Cold War. If I say no, it ignores their behavior. Obviously, energy is going to be a big, big factor. And Georgia and Ukraine are both major gateways of energy into Europe. And that's one of the reasons why it's in our interest. But the Russians, I think we can deal with it. But they got to understand that they're facing a very firm and determined United States of America that will defend our interests and that of other countries in the world.
All right, we're going to try to get in two more questions if we can, so we have to move along. Over in Section A, Terry Shirey. Do I have that right, Terry?
Senator, as a retired Navy chief, my thoughts are often those who serve our country. I know both candidates, both of you expressed support for Israel. If, despite your best diplomatic efforts, Iran attacks Israel, would you be willing to commit U.S. troops in support and defense of Israel, or would you wait on approval from the UN Security Council?
Well, thank you, Terry, and thank you for your service to the country. I want to say everything I ever learned about leadership, I learned from a chief petty officer, and I thank you. And I thank you, my friend. Thanks for serving. Let me say that we obviously would not wait for the United Nations Security Council. I think the realities are that both Russia and China would probably pose significant obstacles. And our challenge right now is the Iranians continue on the path to acquiring nuclear weapons. and it's a great threat. It's not just a threat to the state of Israel. It's a threat to the stability of the entire Middle East. If Iran acquires nuclear weapons, all the other countries will acquire them too. The tensions will be ratcheted up. What would you do if you were the Israelis and the president of a country says that they are determined to wipe you off the map, calls your country a stinking corpse? Now, Senator Obama, without precondition, wants to sit down and negotiate with them. Without preconditions. That's what he stated. Again, a matter of record. I want to make sure that the Iranians that we put enough pressure on the Iranians by joining with our allies, imposing significant, tough sanctions to modify their behavior. And I think we can do that. I think joining with our allies and friends in a league of democracies, that we can effectively abridge their behavior, and hopefully they would abandon this quest that they are on for nuclear weapons. But at the end of the day, my friend, I have to tell you again, and you know what it's like to serve, and you know what it's like to sacrifice, but we can never allow a second Holocaust to take place.
Senator Obama.
Well, Terry, first of all, we honor your service, and we're grateful for it. We cannot allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon. It would be a game changer in the region. Not only would it threaten Israel, our strongest ally in the region, and one of our strongest allies in the world, but it would also create a possibility of nuclear weapons falling into the hands of terrorists. So it's unacceptable. And I will do everything that's required to prevent it. And we will never take military options off the table. And it is important that we don't provide veto power to the United Nations or anyone else in acting in our interests. It is important, though, for us to use all the tools at our disposal to prevent the scenario where we've got to make those kinds of choices. And that's why I have consistently said that if we can work more effectively with other countries, diplomatically, to tighten sanctions on Iran, if we can reduce our energy consumption through alternative energy so that Iran has less money, if we can impose the kinds of sanctions that, say, for example, Iran right now imports gasoline even though it's an oil producer because its oil infrastructure has broken down, if we can prevent them from importing the gasoline that they need and the refined petroleum products, that starts changing their cost-benefit analysis. That starts putting the squeeze on them. Now, it is true, though, that I believe that we should have direct talks, not just with our friends, but also with our enemies, to deliver a tough, direct message to Iran that if you don't change your behavior, then there will be dire consequences. If you do change your behavior, then it is possible for you to rejoin the community of nations. Now, it may not work, but one of the things we've learned is that when we take that approach, whether it's in North Korea or in Iran, then we have a better chance at better outcomes. When President Bush decided we're not going to talk to Iran, we're not going to talk to North Korea, you know what happened? Iran went from 0 centrifuges to develop nuclear weapons to 4,000. North Korea quadrupled its nuclear capability. We've got to try to have talks, understanding that we're not taking military options off the table.
Gentlemen, we've come to the last question, and you'll both be interested to know. This comes from the Internet, and it's from a state that you're strongly contesting, both of you. It's from Peggy in Amherst, New Hampshire. It has a certain Zen-like quality. I'll give you a fair warning. She says, "What don't you know, and how will you learn it?" Senator Obama, you get first crack at that.
My wife, Michelle, is there, and she could give you a much longer list than I do. And most of the time I learn it by asking her. But look, the nature of the challenges that we're going to face are immense. And one of the things that we know about the presidency is that it's never the challenges that you expect. It's the challenges that you don't that end up consuming most of your time. But here's what I do know. I know that I wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for the fact that this country gave me opportunity. You know, I came from very modest means. I had a single mom, and my grandparents raised me.